Inside the gleaming glass boardroom of one of the most powerful tech companies in the city, the atmosphere was heavy with tension. The long oak table, usually a place of confident presentations and proud celebrations, now felt more like a battlefield. 30 of the company's top engineers sat hunched over laptops, their brows furrowed, their fingers tapping furiously, but nothing seemed to work. For weeks, they had been trying to crack a stubborn code that stood between the company and the launch of a revolutionary project, one that promised to change the future of their industry. Millions of dollars were at stake, and so was the reputation of everyone in the room. The board of directors sat at the head of the table, their faces pale with worry. Executives whispered in low tones, exchanging nervous glances at the giant screen where error messages kept flashing in bright red. Critical failure. System lockdown. The words glared back at them, mocking the brilliance of the best minds they had gathered. Every failed attempt felt heavier than the last, and the room carried the energy of frustration mixed with desperation. An engineer leaned back in his chair, rubbing his eyes. Another slammed his notebook shut, muttering under his breath. "We've tried everything." Someone sighed. Yet no one dared admit defeat out loud. The deadline was hours away, and the weight of failure pressed down like a storm cloud. In that silence, you could almost hear the sound of hope slipping away. The brightest minds in the room, the ones who had designed satellites, built systems for governments, and broken barriers in technology, now sat powerless before a problem that refused to be solved. It was in this moment of despair that fate prepared to introduce its most unexpected player. The boardroom door creaked open, breaking the suffocating silence. Heads turned sharply, not with hope but with irritation. A young woman stepped in, balancing a tray of steaming coffees and neatly packed sandwiches. She wore a faded jacket, her sneakers slightly scuffed, her hair tied back in a hurried ponytail. She looked nothing like the high-powered executives or exhausted engineers seated around the table. She was just a delivery girl, someone whose presence usually went unnoticed. Lunch order?" she said softly, placing the tray at the side of the room. For a moment, no one acknowledged her. The engineers were too buried in failure, and the executives too tense to care. Finally, one man waved his hand dismissively. "Just leave it there, thank you." But instead of leaving right away, her eyes drifted toward the enormous screen at the front. Rows upon rows of numbers and letters scrolled endlessly, flashing with red error signs. Most people would have seen nonsense, gibberish meant only for experts. Yet, to her, something felt strangely familiar. She tilted her head, studying the lines like a puzzle she had seen before. She hesitated, biting her lip, torn between minding her own business and voicing the thought forming in her head. The boardroom was no place for a delivery girl to speak up. Still, she couldn't shake the nagging feeling that she recognized the pattern of mistakes. One of the engineers snapped, annoyed by her pause. "Miss, please, just drop it and go." His words stung, but she stayed rooted for a second longer, her heart racing. She wasn't a trained expert, but deep down she had a quiet confidence. Coding had been her secret passion, something she practiced late at night on her old second-hand laptop. She wasn't supposed to be here, but maybe, just maybe, she was meant to be. Her hands trembled slightly as she gathered the courage to speak. The room was filled with the sound of keyboards clacking and frustrated sighs when suddenly her quiet voice broke through. Excuse me," she began timidly, her eyes darting around the room. Dozens of faces turned toward her, some annoyed, some surprised. She felt her cheeks flush, but she pressed on. I think your code loop might be missing a simple reset. Like when a phone freezes and you restart it to clear the memory." The room erupted in a mixture of disbelief and irritation. A few engineers exchanged amused glances, and one even chuckled under his breath. "Are you seriously suggesting a reboot trick to fix this?" someone scoffed. Another shook his head, muttering, "This is why people outside engineering shouldn't meddle." Their laughter wasn't cruel, but it carried the sting of dismissal, as if her words were nothing more than a naive interruption. Her heart sank for a moment, but then one senior manager leaned forward, desperation flickering in his tired eyes. "Wait," he said firmly, silencing the chuckles. "At this point, we've tried everything. Let her explain." The delivery girl swallowed hard, her pulse quickening. She moved closer to the screen, pointing at a sequence of repeating lines. "See this?" she said, her voice gaining a little strength. "It keeps cycling without a break. If you don't clear the cashier, it just keeps failing. It's not broken, it's stuck." The room grew quiet. Engineers leaned forward, staring at the spot she indicated. For the first time, instead of brushing her aside, they were actually listening. Though doubt still lingered in their eyes, there was also a spark of curiosity. Could it really be that simple? She felt a surge of determination. If they gave her the chance, she was ready to prove it. The boardroom, once buzzing with chatter and doubt, fell into an almost eerie silence as the delivery girl stepped toward the keyboard. Her hands trembled, not from lack of knowledge but from the weight of 30 pairs of expert eyes watching her every move. She had never stood in a place like this before. A room where decisions worth millions were made, yet here she was, about to take a chance that could either make her look foolish or change everything. She slid her fingers across the keys, hesitating only for a heartbeat before typing. With careful precision, she adjusted a few lines of code, inserted a reset command, and rearranged the loop sequence. It wasn't flashy, just a small tweak born out of hours of self-learning on her old second-hand laptop. To her, it was second nature, but to the engineers watching, it was unorthodox, almost too simple to believe. When she finally hit enter, the screen froze. A ripple of tension swept through the room. Engineers leaned in closer, holding their breath. The seconds stretched on painfully, each tick of the clock amplifying the doubt. Then, suddenly, the red error messages vanished. The system unlocked smoothly, running flawlessly for the first time in weeks. Gasps filled the air. One engineer shot to his feet, eyes wide. It worked," he whispered. Another buried his face in his hands, shaking his head in disbelief. The executives, who had been on the brink of despair only minutes earlier, now stared at the young woman as if she had performed a miracle. For a brief moment, she couldn't move. The weight of what she had just done didn't sink in until she looked up and saw awe, not dismissal, in their eyes. Against all odds, the delivery girl had succeeded where 30 seasoned engineers had failed. The silence in the boardroom didn't last long. Within seconds it erupted, not with arrogance or competition, but with applause and disbelief. Engineers who had been battling the code for weeks now stared at the young delivery girl with admiration. Executives exchanged astonished glances, their once worried faces softening into smiles of relief. The impossible had just been solved, and not by the people everyone expected, but by the one no one had even noticed when she walked in. One of the directors finally stood, his voice breaking the spell. "Sometimes," he said with a smile, "wisdom comes from the most unexpected places." His words rang with sincerity, and the delivery girl felt her chest tighten with emotion. She lowered her eyes, unsure how to react. "I just wanted to help," she whispered. Another manager leaned forward curiously. "Where did you learn to do that?" She hesitated, then admitted, I study coding at night on my old laptop. I can't afford school yet, but I teach myself whenever I can. I guess I just love solving problems." The room grew quiet again, this time not with doubt, but with respect. The arrogance that had filled the boardroom earlier was gone, replaced by genuine humility. An executive smiled warmly. "Then maybe you don't belong outside this room. How would you like to work with us?" Her eyes widened, tears brimming as the words sank in. It wasn't just about solving the code, it was about being seen, being given a chance. The moment was bigger than her victory. It was proof that brilliance has no boundaries, no uniforms, no titles. She left that day not just as a delivery girl, but as someone who reminded an entire company, and anyone willing to listen, that greatness can come from anywhere, and hope can appear in the most unexpected faces.